Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Key Changes in GSA Schedule Contracting, What You Need to Know. I'm John Williams. I'm a partner in PilieroMazza's Government Contracts Practice Group. As you can see here on the slide, my practice spans a wide range of federal procurement topics, and there's been an increasing focus on GSA schedule contracting as more and more of our clients are doing business with the federal government through the GSA schedules. So it's that growing importance of GSA schedule contracts that's really the impetus behind today's webinar, which is actually the second in a series of webinars that we've been doing at Piliero on GSA schedule contracting. So for those of you who may not know about Piliero, we're a law firm located primarily in Washington, D.C. with a nationwide practice that you can see here described on the slide. We're assisting contractors and also commercial firms in a variety of ways. And if you're not already signed up for our mailing list, I encourage you to go to our website link here to do so. And I'm really thrilled to be joined here today by a very special guest, Courtney Fairchild from Global Services. We've worked with Courtney in Global Services for many years, and she's helped a number of our clients through GSA schedule issues. She's our go-to resource for all things GSA schedules. So Courtney, thank you very much for being here, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and Global Services.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. I've so appreciated our relationship over the years. And I know this is a hot topic, so we're going to have some fun today. But I am Courtney Fairchild, the President and CEO of Global Services, and we help companies obtain and maintain GSA schedule contracts, which happens to be right now kind of hot topic. We assist companies on contract maintenance to help them make the modifications that they need to make, work through compliance issues, and all things systems that we're going to get into just a little bit later today. So I am the owner of Global Services, and Global Services has been in business over 25 years. We have helped over 3,000 contractors in that period of time earn over $25 billion in contracts. So we are proposal specialists and GSA specialists from that perspective. So I think we're well suited between the two of us to talk about some of the changes today, don't you?
Definitely. Thanks, Courtney. We're so glad to have you with us here today, and all of you attendees, we're very glad to have you with us here today as well. So what you have up here on the slide is a little bit of a roadmap for where we're going to be going today. I'm not going to try to sing like David Bowie here, but you get the drift that there's a lot going on with the MASS program. And so Courtney and I are going to take you through many of those changes, including Refresh 29, the shift to transactional data reporting, and the FAS catalog platform, the rewrites for FAR Part 8 and 12, and breaking news. We just got the rewrite for FAR Part 19 a few days ago, so I'll sprinkle in a little bit about that as well and how it's going to impact MASS contracts and many more topics. And as I mentioned before, this is the second webinar in our GSA series. So if you missed the first one, we've got the link here for you. That was back in August, Key Insights for GSA Schedule Contracting. My partner Lauren Breyer and I gave that webinar, and we focused on labor category mapping issues that we've seen, particularly in protests, which is a very common protest issue these days, LCAT mapping, as well as GSA audits. So if you haven't checked that, seen that one, or you want to check it out again, please follow that link.
Right, I highly recommend it, John, by the way. I learned something myself today. So I think anytime that you can teach me something about GSA MASS, it's worth watching.
Well, I don't know that there's any better seal of approval than the Courtney Fairchild seal of approval on a GSA webinar. So I appreciate that very much. So one more housekeeping item here before we start diving in. So all attendees are going to get a link to the recording of this webinar afterwards. So if you're wondering, hey, will I get to see this again, you will get an email from us afterwards. They'll have a link to the recording. And also, we're encouraging everybody to submit questions. There's a Q&A box and you can use that to pop in questions. We will answer as many as we can as we move along, so please don't be bashful in submitting the questions. We're not going to identify you by name in front of the group. And if we can't get to your question during the webinar, we'll try to follow up with you afterwards. So only question so far is about audio problems. I'm sorry for that person who's having some audio difficulties. If that's more than a one-off issue, please go ahead and pop some more questions into the chat there, but hopefully you can get your audio solved. And yes, I'll just quickly answer this question here. The recording will include the slides. The slides are part of the recording. So, all right, well, let's go to the next slide and talk about the elephant in the room. I thought we should start with the elephant in the room, the government shutdown. I'm sure already, just a few days in, everybody's favorite topic. It's an unfortunate reality for all of us in federal contracting that we're having to deal with this again for the first time in a few years. There are a lot of different ways that I'm sure the shutdown is impacting you all listening as contractors. We just put out a client alert yesterday about the way that it's impacting bid protests, for example. There's a lot of different potential impacts of the shutdown. And so we didn't want to give this presentation on GSA schedule contracting and changes that you need to know about without trying to address how does the shutdown affect GSA schedule contracting. So we've got a couple key questions up here on the screen. And Courtney, do you want to take a stab at that first question?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question is how the shutdown impacts new mass contracts and modifications and existing contracts. So the interesting thing about the multiple award schedule program is that it is funded by the industrial funding fee, that 0.75% that the ordering agencies pay through your contract. That is how they are funded. So the shutdown doesn't actually happen for mass CS or contract specialists or contracting officers. So you don't, while there's less staff because of everything else going on in the federal government and the RIFs and the DRP, et cetera, the shutdown itself does not have effect on how fast your modifications are going to move or your new offers. Having said that, GSA is at about a 40% reduction in staff. So things are taking longer in general, and they have more changes than ever in the last 6 months than they probably have in years. So there's just a lot more volume going in. I don't expect anything to move quickly for existing or new offers, but it's not because the government shut down. But I suspect there will be some problems on the order side. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with respect to the second question here, how will the government shutdown impact the pursuit, award, and protest of task orders through mass contracts? It's just the classic lawyer answer of it depends, and it's going to really depend on the procuring agency that we're talking about. If there's you're dealing with a procuring agency that is largely shut down, they're not going to be using the mass contracts for putting out RFQs and orders while the government shut down. But there are plenty of agencies that are still operating somewhat or largely business as usual. I think DHS is one of them from what I've been hearing from clients of ours. So they would be able to continue using the mass program to put out RFQs and make awards of orders. Protests, like I mentioned in the client alert we put out yesterday, that's a little bit of a different story because the GAO is shut down. So you can't file a new protest at GAO until the shutdown is over. If you got a new award that decision that you wanted to protest, your deadline will be the first day that GAO reopens. If the deadline fell while it shut down, the deadline will be extended until the first day that the GAO reopens. Mass orders can also be protested to the Court of Federal Claims, and as far as I understand it, the court is still operating. I mean, there may be a question about how long that will be, and also whether there'll be some reduced capacity there, similar to what Courtney was describing for GSA. But at least as of right now, my understanding is that you could file a protest right now at the court if you wanted to.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, next slide and let you dive in, Courtney.
Thanks. I want to do a quick overview of the requirements of the program, the sales numbers, just to level set for everyone. I know we have both existing contractors on the line as well as people that are interested in perhaps pursuing the GSA schedule. So let's take a step back. GSA consolidated what were 24 multiple award schedule contracts into a single multiple award schedule, or the MAS schedule. So we will use terms like MAS, the schedule, the multiple award schedule. They're all the same thing now. They're a single schedule that 24 different contracts were consolidated into one by GSA with about 6 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long. Their rationale was that really a lesser administrative burden, both for contractors and for GSA staff that have to administer those contracts, as well as just a simplification from an ordering perspective. It was often hard for an ordering agency to know which contract they should really be purchasing off of. In that consolidation, they also changed the special item numbers, or SIN numbering, to North American Industrial Classification Standard codes to follow more the ordering procedures for the federal government. And when they moved the SINs to NAICS, they believe that it's made it easier for ordering agencies to understand where to go when they're releasing RFQs through the GSA multiple award schedule. The combination, next slide please, the combination of the two were supposed to essentially move the needle in terms of sales. So you look at this slide and we're looking at total sales through MAS from 21 to 24. We moved from 39 billion, almost 40 billion, to over 52 billion. The numbers aren't finalized for 25 yet, but we expect them to be even higher. There's a number of reasons for the MAS increases. One is the simplification and the better understanding on behalf of the buyer. Another is something we're going to talk about, a new initiative that GSA has put out, market research as a service, and I'll explain that. And lastly, the advent of COVID and the reduction in workforce for acquisition professionals has pushed to existing contract vehicles, and everything that we're hearing. I mean, if you're to listen to all the chatter, GSA is going to take over the world, and they're going to, but they are going to be the purchaser of all common goods and services. So we all expect to see these numbers to increase. To use both existing vehicles, which John's going to talk about, the FAR rewrite in Part 8, as well as their own vehicles. So this is just for the record. These are the highest spending large categories following category management. The numbers at the bottom are the total sales. They are not the aggregate of, there are more categories than will fit on the slide. So these are the highest grossing. And you will also note that IT accounts for about half the spend that goes through GSA MAS, and a large majority of that is services spend anymore as well. So assuming that we have a couple of people on the line that are looking at wanting to get on schedule, let's talk about the past performance requirements to be able to actually pursue the GSA contract. One of the interesting things about the multiple award schedule is that it's a past performance-based contract. It is not based on your capabilities. It is not based on the cost of your performance. It's based on what you have done over the last 2 years. So it's past performance-based from a technical standpoint. I'm going to run through just sort of the 5 must-haves if you want to pursue a contract. You should have been in business for 2 years running revenue. So it is not the thing or the contract vehicle that you get the day that you start your company. There is a springboard program. Thank you for taking IT out of that. There is a springboard program that allows for companies to pursue for less than 2 years of performance. But it's not a great program unless you're a JV, and I will explain that later. But for individual offers, you're allowed to substitute through the Springboard program for technical past performance, but not pricing. So even if you have cleared the hurdle on the technical side, if you don't have invoices for products or services, you will still be dead in the water. Anyway, I will just say I think it's easier to get some past performance and pursue a GSA Mass than it is to get a Springboard offer, again, unless you're a JV. You have to have these relevant project experience in order to pursue any special item number. So I have to have at least one project that I've completed in the last 2 years, or if it's ongoing, the first base year has to be complete for professional services. For an IT special item number, I need 2 projects to be able to pursue any one of those. So they have to be in the same scope, and they have to have been completed within the last 2 years. It is, I think, one of the easiest ways to get rejected from a GSA Mass offer is to compensate in terms of the number of special item numbers that you're pursuing, and to try to have projects apply across multiple SINs. GSA tends to look at things in 1 or 2 SINs per project because that's the predominance of the work. So in your initial pursuit, you want to keep to SINs that you have true past performance in, rather than risking getting a rejection. Whereas later you can always add by modification a special item number, and if that gets rejected, it has not affected your contract.
Hey, Courtney, let me jump in with a question that's come in from one of our attendees. They're wondering about this 2-year track record requirement. If you have seen how this is applied in the context of a company reorganization, maybe there's a corporate spinoff or there's a change in the entity name or structure, like are there workarounds there? Is that an issue that you need to contend with?
What you really need to focus on is the UEI. So as long as the past performance is in the UEI, it doesn't matter that there was a name change. If there's an acquisition, but that entity is still going to exist as that UEI, as a standalone entity, then it doesn't matter. But if you are to, through merger and acquisition, absorb a company, then the contracts will have to be novated to the buying entity. It all depends on what the structure of the company is. But if the UEI stays, the past performance is tied to the UEI, that unique entity identifier. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess by the same token, then if it's a brand new entity, so it's a new UEI, then you may have a challenge here, even if it was a spin-off from an organization that has plenty of past performance.
Absolutely. And this is something that companies think about doing all the time because they want to separate out a federal, they have a big commercial practice, and because of the commercial sales practices and the price reduction clause, they have a desire to spin off a federal entity. But that only works if you spin it off and then have them subcontract to the original firm for some period of time so that you gain the past performance for technical as well as for pricing. But it could be done. It'll just take more time than people probably wanted to. Okay, so those are the technical past performance requirements. There are also customer past performance requirements that we're going to talk through very quickly. Any UEI that's going after a GSA Mass has to have a minimum of 3 customer references, and that can be done in one of 2 ways. If you have Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System ratings, CPARs, in the system, you can simply pull those CPARs if you have 3 of them within the last 3 years. That has to be within the last 3 years. You can pull them and put them in the offer. If you don't, you can do what are called past performance questionnaires that are part of the solicitation, and you can have, within the last 3 years, your client's fill out the PPQ and submit it with the offer. Also, you need 3 total. So if you have 1 CPAR, then you do 2 PPQs. If you have 2 CPAR, then you do 1 PPQ for a total of 3. But that's my other way of saying that the springboard doesn't work well, because there is no substitution for the customer references. So they've given you a way to get around one part of the offer, but not the others. And the reason that JVs don't have this problem, because the members will suffice for the past performance, which we'll talk about later. Lastly, there are pricing requirements that are also past performance based. You have to have sold what you want to sell on the GSA schedule. You have to have invoice support. It doesn't matter if it's products or services. You have to have done and sold in the way that you want to go to market for the GSA schedule. So it's important that you think about this as you're bidding, if you're a services company or a product company for that matter, to ensure that you are bidding the labor categories and the rates that you want to have exist on the GSA schedule contract. So that's my quick primer on the GSA and requirements to be able to pursue. What I want to talk about next are some of the big headline initiatives that you've heard from GSA over the last, oh gosh, it's already October, I guess the last 8 months or so. One of the largest is very important to existing contractors. The Federal Acquisition Service put out something they call the Mass Right Sizing Initiative. And the entire focus of this right sizing is on compliance for existing contractors. They are suddenly going to be enforcing the minimum sales, which any one of us that has had a mass contract knows that you have to do at least $100,000 in sales in the first 5 years and $125,000 in the second, any subsequent 5-year period. Well, when you came up to year 5 and you hadn't met that threshold, GSA, as long as you could prove you were bidding and making a really good marketing effort, they were allowing you to go through with the contract extension for the second or third or fourth 5-year period. That's no longer the case. There's a very hard and fast no to extending the contract if you have not had sales. Additionally, if you have any other non-compliance issues besides that, whether it's reporting or small business subcontracting reporting or problems flagged by your CAV, the contractor assistance visit, these are reasons that GSA is looking to pare down this program. They're looking for ways to be able to rid the non-compliant and for very good reason. It costs a lot of money to keep administering these contracts. So they want the best and those that are compliant with the terms. They also got rid of a bunch of special item numbers that were effectively not having sales or were redundant with some of their other federal procurement channels. So the entire idea is to pare it down, to make it more effective, and to have a better crop of contractors available for federal purchase. So that's the right sizing initiative.
Let me jump in with a question on that came in, and I understood you said that maybe in the past there'd be a little more flexibility on the minimum sales requirement as long as you were showing efforts towards getting work, and that's become now hard and fast. You've got to have these sales. Do you think there might be any swinging of the pendulum back in the other direction in light of the shutdown, that they might be receptive to the argument that the ability to drive sales? Like, we've got a question here from somebody that won an award. That award would generate revenue, but for the fact that the government is shut down right now.
If you can prove that you've won an award, they will. right? So if you can show a signed contract that's going to demonstrate you'll meet that amount, that's probably the one thing that would work. I think your question goes to how long will this shutdown go on, and how the reason there was so much leniency in the last 5-year period was that argument was made for COVID, that it was very difficult for that year and a half to be able to meet minimum sales. If this only lasts 5 days, I don't think we have much of an argument in terms, and that's now, as opposed to you've had 5 years to do it. I don't think anyone would argue too hard with if you weren't able to make $100,000 of sales in 5 years, then probably you don't need the contract. But that's a tough one. We have a client that lost their contract 1 month ago, and then 2 weeks later needed the GSA schedule to close a deal. We're seeing so much more go through GSA Mass right now that it should become easier. But if you happen to be in a very bad timing situation, I'm not sure there's anything you can do. And most importantly, once you've been off-ramped to GSA Mass, there is now a 24-month waiting period before you're allowed to resubmit another offer. Go ahead.
Oh, no, there was another question in here that if you wait that 24-month period, is there any drag on your application that you were removed once previously? Would that be held against you in some way, make it more difficult to get back on later?
It won't be held against you, but there are additional requirements in the solicitation that you have to present, which is exactly what I was just about to say, which is you have to have proof of a federal prime contract or subcontract. You have to have a marketing plan. There's just additional requirements that you're going to have to submit. I don't think if you're persuasive that it will necessarily count against you, but in the meantime, you're going to have to do some kind of federal work in another way to be able to prove that it is worth giving you another contract. Are we good on the questions?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Of course, I love it. So let's talk about the next sort of initiative that GSA is talking about. You're going to hear a lot about the OneGov strategy for IT spend. There isn't a lot of detail around this as much as I might want yet, but the idea and what it seems to signal is that the federal government, specifically GSA, wants to purchase directly from OEMs, from manufacturers, and to standardize the terms and performance, to improve scrutiny, transparency. The idea is that everyone in the federal government should have the same price for an Adobe license, for example, which is they started with 4 major software manufacturers. And they really want to get to a more commercial practice as opposed to what I suspect and have sort of read and perceive that they are paying too much to the resellers from this perspective. It may or may not be a good thing depending on where you are on that fence. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we have significant concerns, and that's this last question here. Our small business resellers, and maybe you even just take small business out of that. Just say our IT value-added resellers going to be left out in the cold. And I mean, from what I've heard out of GSA when they were making the rounds over the summer to explain this initiative, it sounds like they envision GSA having a very passive role in whether IT VARs will still have a place in these procurements. I think some of the comments were that we're going to essentially invert the current arrangement, where right now you have an IT value-added reseller as the prime, and they would have the manufacturer as the sub. GSA wants to go directly to the manufacturer, so they'll now be the prime. And then GSA says, well, IT VARs, there'll still be a place for them as subcontractors. However, that'll be up to the OEMs. And I think that's I think from my perspective, an overly passive approach
Yeah.
from GSA, because as the federal agency responsible for the contract with the OEMs, they can insist on, and most of those OEMs are going to be large businesses for the the predominant IT products that are being purchased. There will be small business subcontracting plan requirements that GSA is in charge of administering for these prime contracts, and they can insist that the OEMs make a place for, have a goal for subcontracting to these IT VARs so that they aren't entirely left out in the cold. Because I think if they just leave it entirely up to the OEMs, I have a significant concern about what place the IT VARs will have in many of these procurements. And I also, if you let me just stay up on my soapbox here for a moment, I think there's a misperception that IT value-added resellers aren't adding anything to transaction other than a markup. And while I know from firsthand experience a number of clients in this industry, not just IT products, but a lot of IT value-added resellers provide tremendous value to the federal government in a variety of ways that I think
and that the OEMs aren't interested in doing, right? The value add is not only just there, it's something that the OEMs don't want to be doing.
Right, exactly. So I think there's concern here. I think something else that stuck with me from the comments the GSA made over the summer, that they hadn't really heard much from IT VAR, from resellers. And if that's accurate, then I think that's on us as an industry, the IT value-added resellers who may be listening, and those of us that work with them, to make sure that our voices are being heard as GSA continue. I mean, I think this approach, this strategy is still in its relative infancy. So I think there's still time for IT resellers to make sure their voice is heard, and I think that's important. So make sure there's a seat at the table.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it overlooks the value of a value-added reseller. So we'll leave that there. But I absolutely agree that there's some balance that probably needs to be struck here. Okay, so that's the one Gov. We've got one more initiative that I want to talk about, and that is the MRAS system, which is GSA's Market Research as a Service. This is good business on GSA's part. They have created a free FAR compliant RFI, request for information, for ordering agencies, right? We talked about the fact that there are so few acquisition professionals left at all the ordering agencies, and they're bound by FAR requirements to do certain requests for information before putting out a procurement. So GSA created this MRAS system and division to be able to say, hey, we'll do this ordering agencies for free for you. And they send out RFIs and very smartly send them to GSA Mass and Oasis, to their own contract holders. So you will see RFIs come out to your email, and you'll see them in eBuy under and only for the special item numbers that you hold. So here's my play on this, because I've seen people, companies actually win when they did not even have an awareness of the need prior. I think getting involved earlier is more helpful, but you need to whitelist the email address rfi@research.gsa.gov. Make sure that you're getting those emails, or that you're looking at them in the eBuy system, and analyze your portfolio. We talked about the past performance being an issue for any special item number, read NAICS code, that you want to be able to list on your GSA contract. This also means you need to keep analyzing your past performance on a quarterly, if not every 6 months, certainly every year. Are there sins that we now have past performance in that we didn't before that we should be pursuing? Are there labor categories that we should be adding? You need to be constantly keeping your contract up to date. Are you doing things for the new economic price adjustment clause? Are there ways that you can improve your visibility and status on GSA to make this more biddable? If this is going to become a more important contract, you also need to pay more attention, not only from a compliance standpoint, but from a business development standpoint. Okay, now that we're through the initiatives, let's talk about some of the changes. We are now in refresh 29. I don't know, I think there's been a refresh just about every month this year of the solicitation, but refresh 29 put out two really significant changes that I want to talk about. The first is that what we've all known for so many years as the prevailing pricing document, the price proposal template, was replaced by the Federal Contract Platform, or FCP file. It's called the Services Plus or FCP product file. So your submissions are going to look a little bit different. The format, the Excel spreadsheets that you have to fill are different, and those will be maintained in the FCP platform that I'm going to talk about later. So just know, if you were working on an offer prior to refresh 29, you need to go pick up refresh 29 and get the new forms to fill out, because if you submit with the PPT, you will have a rejection. Secondarily, and I think more interestingly, there used to be three economic price adjustment clauses in the solicitation. They consolidated those three into a new GSAR 552-238-20. So there's one single economic price adjustment clause with some significant changes. There used to be caps on the percentage of increase that you were allowed to request, and it differed by large category what those were, but the caps existed, except when GSA had issued for about a year period of time a moratorium, a memo that would allow for larger increases. So the new EPA clause doesn't have any caps, and there are 4 different ways that you can ask for increases. You can pick a fixed escalation for the life of the contract, a market index, establish commercial pricing, and then there's also a request for increase based on unforeseeable market conditions, which could have been COVID, and from that, tariffs, whatever is increasing your cost on either labor or product. You do have to now, every existing contractor, you will hear from your contracting officers, we are working through hundreds of these right now. You have to submit a modification to name the new price reduction clause. So it doesn't necessarily change the way that you were originally awarded, but you've got to do a terms and conditions modification to name this 552 and whichever aligns to how you were awarded. It's also an opportunity to perhaps change that. If you were based on a commercial price list, but you don't really maintain it and you want to set escalation, this modification, terms and conditions modification, is the opportunity to request to be tied to a different factor. Again, subjectively up to the negotiation between your contracting officer and yourself. The one thing that I think everybody misses on this new EPA, because we get all excited, we think, okay, there's great ways that we can ask for price increases that didn't exist before, which is all true. However, the price reduction clause still stands. So if I have a guaranteed 5% difference between my most favored customer rate and my GSA rate, and I ask for a 10% increase, I better be sure that all of my most favored customer rates have increased by 10%, or I'm going to immediately be in violation of the price reduction clause by taking the escalation. So you have to do an analysis. For those of you that are transactional data reporting, that doesn't matter, and this is a little bit more exciting, to be honest. But if you do have the price reduction clause as a part of your contract, pay attention to what your current contracts are before you start asking for larger increases. Okay, those are the two big changes in the refresh. now I had just talked about transactional data reporting, and I want to point out that GSA is moving most special item numbers to transactional data reporting. We're about halfway through, but they're predominantly product thus far, predominantly product. So what's TDR? Transactional data reporting is a prices paid data collection initiative that's led by GSA. They're trying to get not just ceiling rates, but actual prices paid with a commitment to data driving procurement strategies. What GSA concocted, which is a great thing for federal contractors, is if you agree to report on a monthly basis by line item invoice data rather than quarterly contract total data, which gave them really no prices paid information previously, they removed the price reduction clause from the contract. So if you are reporting monthly, you are TDR, and you no longer have to report commercial sales practices, nor most favored customer rates. So GSA might still have you invoice support the labor categories and products you want to put on schedule, but you don't have to certify it's the lowest rate that you've billed in the last 2 years, which is significant. If you have any of the SINs that are TDR eligible, it is now mandatory. What started as a pilot program, you got to opt in or choose to participate, and they are now moving to mandatory. So you may have seen the Cloud SIN 518210C is now TDR eligible, and you're watching all of those contractors have to submit modifications to enter the TDR program in the next quarterly cycle. The reason that GSA is making a push for all SINs to be TDR by the end of fiscal year 26, government fiscal year 26, is that in order to be considered a best-in-class vehicle, and to my knowledge, they may be renaming this entire BIC thing or doing some things behind the scenes, but in order to be considered a best-in-class vehicle, which the MAS is technically not, you have to have prices paid data. So while Oasis is a BIC, GSA MAS is not, and I believe it is their intent to try and make this what I will call a best-in-class vehicle. I don't know what it's going to be called in the future, but there's going to be some version of this required use vehicle, something like that. So I think that's the drive behind it. But know that you will, in one of these refreshes, get moved to transactional data reporting. And the minute you have one SIN that's TDR, your whole contract is TDR. Okay, one of my least favorite topics, because it's super complicated to learn, is the FAS contract platform, or FCP. It's a new web-based catalog management application. You existing contractors will know of Schedules Input Program, or SIP, which was really not a very good software program. So we get excited. We have this new replacement, great. And there are some really great features about it. It integrates with eMod and auto-publishes the product and services file to GSA Advantage, cutting out a step of review that GSA was having to do that could take months. So you could have been awarded a contract, posted your price list for approval, and waited 2 months for that price list to be posted. Until the price list is posted, you have no access to eBuy. So you're effectively cut out from being able to see anything in that period of time. So that's the good news. The back and forth between the two is extremely confusing. I think we've done maybe 50 or 100 at this point, and I don't understand how contractors are supposed to understand the back and forth. You've got to start an FCP, go to eMod, back to FCP, do data validation, submit an eMod. It's just not the easiest thing to learn. However, the good news is that it carries a master catalog file. So you're published now. Everyone's used to seeing price lists in a PDF format on GSA Advantage or the eLibrary, and what you're going to find is a terms and conditions file that carries no pricing, and an Excel catalog for services when you're pulling a services catalog. Don't get confused. It is a phased transition that is happening by the end of next year for everyone, but they're rolling in because they can't, it's a three-step process that requires the CS to approve along the way. And between this, the TDR mods and the EPA mods, it seems like every contractor is having to do 3 just this month. And you can imagine the backlog that causes for the GSA staff as well. There are office hours that the FCP team has on a weekly basis. And if you go to the FCP site, you're going to get an email, and it will explain all of those things to you. But I do suggest trying to attend some of the office hours. If you're coming up in rotation, the next entry point is October 14th and then November 11th. And so they're just doing them in batches until they get all the way through. New offers are already in that format. And once you've been awarded, you will immediately turn around and have to do an SCP baseline to get your offer into that system as well. So the last system I want to talk about is more about a business development initiative for you, which is how to improve your visibility on eBuy. Not all contractors realize that special item numbers, not all of them, but most of them, carry subgroups in the eBuy system. This allows you to go in as the administrator, if you're on your contract for eBuy, to establish these subgroups and to check off any and all that you think are applicable to you, with the exception of 2 that I'll talk about. But the idea here is, if I'm an ordering agency and I want to do a search on one of the subgroups, if you haven't checked that in eBuy, you will not show up in the search, and you will not, if I put out the opportunity in eBuy under that subgroup, you will not be able to see it even though you hold the special item number. So if you're not familiar with this, be sure to log into your eBuy application, and click on Modify Subgroups on the right-hand side of the screen, and you'll see the list pop up for any of the special item numbers that you hold. Be sure to go in and take a look at that if you haven't already. My one note here is there are 2 subgroups that you cannot self-select without going through GSA. The first is for the cybersecurity SIN, 54151 hacks. You must first submit a modification to add that SIN and pass oral interview for any of the subgroups that you want to be able to add. And the second is the program eval, 541611 program evaluation. There is a technical proposal that you have to submit via email, and once you pass that, you can check off that subgroup. Just a quick note, because it happens to be something that I think people, not everyone's aware of, and you won't be as visible if you're not. Okay, now onto your favorite topic and my favorite topic, joint ventures on the multiple award schedule. In 23, Refresh 17 instituted procedures and instruction to offers that allow for JVs to be able to get on the GSA mass. And I can tell you they're doing it in droves. We're probably doing more JV than individual right now with all the push. This is the place where the Springboard startup actually does work for less than 2 years of experience, because you're basing it on the members, each individual member's experience. The one weird thing about a JV mass is that each contractor has to name their own labor categories, literally with a parenthesis after it, member A or member B. And in usage, you're only allowed to bill and use your own labor categories in performance of the JV. The easiest way to pursue a JV mass is for sins and sins that you have in common. And so looks a little bit like a CTA, but with a JV contract or a JV socio identified with that UEI. You can hold up to 3 JV mass. You can be a partner in up to 3 JV mass contracts and hold your own member company. And that's the one that the GSA has imposed. You do have to disclose the other contracts when you're submitting. And you have to have a statement that you're not going to compete. Neither the members nor JVs that you're a part of can compete against each other on any RFQ. They have not limited it. You can have 3 JVs hold the same SIN and be a member of all 3. You just have to be able to manage which entities are bidding so that you're not bidding against each other. That's the good news. The sort of interesting news, and the thing I'm always curious about, I think you can help me educate us on, John. I'm always confused on the size standard for a JV. When do I time out? When can I recertify? And when do we become affiliated? Because this is a 20-year contract vehicle, right? And can I extend my contract?
I'm glad you asked that question, Courtney, because it's answered on the next slide here. Let's get into it. And, as we're waiting for the next slide to load up, so Courtney just answered a couple of your questions. Somebody had asked a question early on, can a JV get onto mass? So, yep, the answer is definitely yes there. So somebody else asked a question that I think kind of sounds like a CTA, which Courtney just mentioned. So I just briefly want to discuss the two. A CTA, a contractor team arrangement for the GSA schedule procurement, would be an agreement between 2 schedule holders to pursue a schedule opportunity together, an order, using their respective schedule contracts. But it would not be a separate legal entity. So this is just an arrangement between 2 companies to partner, to team together and use their respective schedule contracts. A joint venture, on the other hand, is a separate legal entity. So you have to, well, you don't have to, but it would be advised to form an LLC, and you get it in SAM, and then you can go through the process of getting the joint venture its own schedule contract. So in that scenario, you wouldn't directly be using the respective schedule contracts from the joint venture partners. Although, as Courtney pointed out, GSA's guidance is that the joint ventures labor categories should connect back to the labor categories of the respective partners. And if I'm a partner in a JV, I'm supposed to be using the LCATs that correspond to my schedule according to GSA's guidance. So I hope that answered the questions that are in. And to answer Courtney's question, yes. So a lot of our clients form mentor-protege joint ventures. And these mentoring relationships, they're very popular in part because they allow a large business to form a joint venture with a small business and go after set-aside work. That also permits a mentor-protege joint venture to get on the schedule. According to what Courtney was laying out, mentor-protege JVs can get schedule contracts. But there is a potential issue here with the duration of the schedule contract, which could be for up to 20 years, and the maximum duration of one mentoring relationship is only 6 years. And a protege is allowed to have up to 2 mentoring relationships. So if the protege decided to use both of those relationships with the same mentor, then you could get up to 12 years. You could double that 6 to 12, but that's the most that you could get under the current rules. So you will not be able to keep your small designations in the mass contract through the full 20 years of the mass contract period. You at most 6 or 12 years, and then once the mentor protege is gone, if your mentor is large, then you wouldn't be able to re-represent as a small business. There's also a unique issue that we've run into. I think, Courtney, you've been working on some workarounds here about how does an 8A JV get into the 8A mass pool?
Yeah, here's the thing, just very quickly. SBA doesn't have the resources to certify 8A JVs that don't have any work. So they refuse to certify until you get your first award, and the GSA Mass does count as the first award. So I encourage the 8A member company to reach out to their business operations specialist post-award. So you're not going to be 8A when you get awarded. You'll have to submit a modification once you've gotten the SBA to certify the JV. And if SBA gets any more strict on that, then what you said is true, but I have seen it happen recently. But JVs are only eligible for the competitive pool, not the sole source pool.
Yeah, and we can go to the next slide, but as it's popping up, I'll answer a question that came in about the 2-year rule for joint ventures. So yes, there is an SBA rule that limits one particular joint venture to pursuing new prime contract awards in a 2-year period. That 2-year period starts running when the JV wins its first prime contract. The mass contract would be considered a prime contract. Each task order underneath of the mass contract is not a separate prime contract. That's an order that is not factored into this 2-year rule. So if you just formed a joint venture tomorrow and you go get your mass contract, that will start your 2-year clock for pursuing additional prime contracts, but you will not be limited to pursuing task orders under the mass contract within that 2-year period. You'll be able to pursue task orders as long as you're eligible as a joint venture to continue doing so. Now, if you have a pre-existing joint venture that, let's say you won your first prime contract in that JV back in 2022, you would not want to use that joint venture to try to get onto the schedule contract if your mentor is a large business, because you're now outside the 2-year window, and that joint venture won't have you'll be affiliated with your partner. You won't have the small business eligibility that you're looking for. So just briefly up on the screen here is a case we had earlier this year. I wanted to mention because both Courtney and I talked about this guidance from GSA that requires the joint venture LCATs to connect through to the partners' schedules and each partner to use their respective LCATs. We tried to raise this in a bid protest at the GAO, and the GAO said that this GSA guidance, it wasn't binding law or regulation applicable to the RFQ, and so they wouldn't accept an argument that this contractor didn't have the right LCATs in its joint venture contract, because from our perspective, the joint venture's mass contract didn't have LCATs that the protege company could use from its own schedule contract to do the work. So I think the answer there is if you wanted that type of an issue to be binding in an RFQ, you would need to ask the agency at the RFQ stage to include a requirement to that effect, to essentially incorporate the GSA's guidance there into the RFQ. All right, let's go to the next slide. We've just got a few minutes left here, but we've just got a few slides left, so it's perfect. Courtney also asked about, recertifying size and how does that work? And there have been some changes going on there with respect to mass contracts. So SBA issued new recertification rules back in January, but before those new rules, there historically had been an exception from the recertification rules for mass contracts. So based on that exception, size and status for mass contract holders was based on the date of offer, regardless of if there was a recertification. So essentially, your status showing on the master contract, that's just the way that it stayed. And so you could keep your status on the mass contract even after an acquisition or a merger, at least until the end of your current option period. Well, let's go to the next slide. In January of this year, though, SBA changed their recertification rules, and they've now removed this exception for GSA schedule contracts. So the SBA's recertification rules now apply to all contracts, including mass. And so that means if you go through a merger or acquisition, you have to recertify within 30 days after the transaction, including on your mass contract, and that could have adverse impact on the ability to continue pursuing task orders under that vehicle. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, we'll wrap up here on FAR Part 8 and 12 rewrites, and I'm sure you'll want to stay a couple minutes past to hear about FAR Part 19 as well. So all these rewrites are scheduled to take effect in early November. The FAR Part 8 and 12 rewrites came out a little while back. FAR Part 8 is what deals with FSS contracting, Part 12, commercial procurements. So I think one of the noteworthy changes is that FAR Part 8 used to have all the ordering procedures for how FSS orders should be placed, and that's now all been removed. And it just says essentially see the GS acquisition manual, the GSAM. So I think that's interesting because we now don't have this in regulation anymore. It's, in theory, in the FAR at least, in theory, it's more streamlined, it's not duplicative of what's in the GSAM, seems to give GSA more control over what those ordering procedures will look like. Required use contracts are now mandatory for commercial products or services, or they will be when this takes effect, unless an exception is granted. So that's a further push towards what we had been referring to as BIC contracts, and maybe that's changing to required use contracts. And we may, as Courtney alluded to before, we may end up with MAS as a required use contract, which would, just further increase the importance and why we're having these webinars, and wanting you all to focus on GSA schedule contracting, because more and more that's the direction that the government is moving. Important change to FAR Part 12, they have said that the simplified acquisition procedures are going to apply to commercial product and service acquisitions up to 7.5 million. So that's a significant change. That's now much larger swath of procurements that can be awarded and evaluated much more on a much more simplified basis, likely harder to protest these types of procurements. So that can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what side of the fence you're sitting on in a given procurement. Again, with the objective towards greater efficiency in procurement. And for FAR Part 19, so that just came out a couple days ago. The good news for small businesses is they retained the rule of two. There was a lot of concern. What was going to happen to the rule of two? Was it going to go away? So the good news is they retained the rule of two, but the FAR Part 19 will say that the rule of two does not apply to orders. So that means for an order under MAS, the ordering agency doesn't have to step through the rule of two. Now, that's not necessarily a change from the way things have long been for FAR Part 8 procurements, but I think that'll be disappointing news, given there had been a trend in the direction of requiring the rule of two for orders. So that's one notable change for MAS contracts. And the other one I wanted to mention is that the FAR Part 19 rewrite doesn't require small business representations at the order level. So again, this comes back to the point I was making before. Moving forward, your status for MAS orders should be based on your status at the MAS contract level. And you may have to recertify at the MAS contract level if you go through a merger or acquisition or at the end of the 5th year, but otherwise you shouldn't be having to recertify for orders. But there is some confusion right now because the SBA's rules, and I think there may be still a part in FAR Part 19 that indicate maybe contracting officers still have the discretion to request representation at the order level. So we're going to need to see how the dust settles on this, and SBA is expected to make a conforming change to their rules. So it's a bit of a TBD there, but I think overall, this probably provides greater certainty and flexibility for small business MAS holders, that you know that you're aiming at your status on the master contract, and it seems don't need to worry about making the representations at the order level. I think on our last slide here, we've got some resources for you, some links and email addresses to use. And on the very last slide, we have Courtney's contact information and mine. I really just want to thank you again, Courtney, for being here. Wealth of wonderful information that you shared with everybody today. I know we got to answer a lot of the questions that were posed, but not all of them. I can see many here we didn't get to. So we will try to follow up with each of you afterwards. You'll all get a link for today's presentation. And again, apologize for running over a little bit, but thank you for hanging in there with us, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Don.